Basic studio gear. Vigates, how goes it? I'm Chris Presnell, and welcome to the Mix Repair Guy channel. In this video, we'll look at the basic gear you'll need for a home studio. We'll talk about what you might need now, and how to plan for future expansion. Let's get into it.
What is a DAW? DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. We're usually talking about the software, but the whole computer system can also be called a DAW. The most basic setup is a computer, an interface, a microphone, a set of headphones or speakers, and software for recording and mixing. If you have these items, you've got a basic studio. Fortunately, you don't need a high-speed gaming computer for audio, and can even get by with a device as humble as an iPad running GarageBand connected to a small interface. There are several mainstream DAW programs in the App Store for iPads, as well as many effects plugins and virtual instruments. If you're using an existing computer, choose one from the past 5 to 10 years. The older it is, the older the operating system is that can run on it. External hardware like interfaces also have a limited support life, since the manufacturers only update drivers for a limited number of years. Eventually, your computer will be too old for support updates for the operating system, plugins, and even the DAW itself. If you plan on never upgrading past a certain version, then you're fine with an older machine. It's all too easy to get sucked into the endless loop of upgrades. First the machine, so you can run a newer operating system, then your DAW, then your plugins, then a newer, even faster machine, which then runs even newer software and hardware, and on and on. Then, what do you do with the old gear? I have a whole pile of interfaces whose old software drivers no longer work with current operating systems and are basically unusable bricks. Security is an important reason to choose a newer computer. Eventually, operating system vendors end support for security updates, which can leave your system vulnerable to malware, hacking, and data loss. Many PCs are going through this issue now since their hardware can't run Windows 11, and updates for Windows 10 are ending or have ended depending on when you watch this video. The computer display, or monitor, is a flat reflective surface that doesn't help acoustics, so try not to get one that's too big. On many computers, you can add a second monitor, which is what I do. This can also be a future studio upgrade. Make sure your furniture has enough room for a second monitor so you can add one down the road. Just be sure your computer supports multiple monitors. The larger the screen, the more of your song can be seen at once, which makes editing easier and faster. Make sure the monitor and computer use the same type of connector. Most computers and monitors support HDMI, so that's probably the best way to connect. Software. Okay, so you've chosen your computer. That determines what DAW software you can choose for your rig, since not all DAWs run on multiple platforms. For example, GarageBand is only for Macs and iPads, whereas Cakewalk is only for Windows. All DAWs let you run third-party plugins, so I don't usually worry about what plugins come with a DAW, since I rarely use them. Some DAWs come with more virtual instruments, which is great for songwriter and certain genres of music. But I use third-party plugins for this too, so DAW choice for me is just about which user interface I prefer. Pro Tools is my default choice, but I have several others for compatibility with other studios and clients. Along with the DAW, you'll probably want to use third-party plugins for effects and instruments as well. There are a few popular formats of plugins, and not all formats are supported by all DAWs. Pro Tools uses the AAX plugin format, so if that's your DAW, be sure whatever plugin you buy is available in AAX format. Almost every other DAW supports the VST3 format, and most plugins support both. You can install your plugins for all the formats they support. For me, that means everything I have installed for Pro Tools will also work in all the other DAWs I use. Virtual instruments aren't limited to pianos and synths either. I use Easy Drummer and Steven Slate drums for the drum sounds on my own productions. I have a Roland V drum kit connected via MIDI, so a real drummer can perform on my songs. But I also program full song drum parts right in the DAW when I don't have a professional drummer on hand. Speaking of having a device for inputting a performance, I also have a Mini Lab keyboard as well as a full-size 88-key MIDI keyboard for inputting performances from a real keyboard player. Those data entry devices make no sound on their own, they just send MIDI note information to whatever virtual instrument plugin is in use. That's how I use the Roland V-Drum kit as well. I don't use its own sounds, just plugins. FX plugins. There are a lot of third-party plugins for effects and processing. For my own collection, many of my favorites turn out to be emulations of vintage gear. Emulations can recreate the harmonics from the transformers and circuitry of the original hardware, which is what gave a lot of that old gear its magic. Sometimes they capture the interaction between certain controls on the real gear. Other times they duplicate the snap of a particular vintage compressor's attack, or the harmonics of a vintage transformer or inductor. I like separate plugins, but I also like channel strip plugins. They emulate an entire channel from a famous mixing console. That usually means the preamp, the filters, the EQ, and the dynamics section. I have a lot of this type of plugin, but my favorite is any emulation of an SSL 4000E channel strip. I've got SSL hardware modules of the mic, pre, EQ, and dynamics of a 4000E in my gear rack, so I like the plugin since they give me similar results. It's just nice to have one plugin that deals with filtering, EQ, and dynamics all in one place. Sometimes I need something specific that other hardware is better at, so then I'll add some emulations of that hardware to my mix. Examples of this would be adding a Pultec-style EQ to use its well-known boost attenuate technique for a nice solid low end on bass or kick. Or maybe I'll add a 1073-style EQ plugin for some bite or aggression on an electric guitar. Maybe I want to add a bit of DBX 160-style compression spank to a snare drum. These are all cases where I'll use separate plugins instead of my favorite channel strip. The need for EQ on a track can be obvious. The need to control dynamics is less clear. Let's take the example of lead vocals. They almost always need compression because the human voice is a very dynamic instrument. When the rest of a song is keeping steady levels, vocals will tend to dip in and out because they're so dynamic, and that's where a compressor solves the problem. A compressor will boost the quieter parts by reducing the dynamic range. Then they don't get lost at any point in your mix. This also gives the vocals a more in-your-face quality, which is popular across many modern genres. Another overlooked signal processor you should have and use for vocals is a de-esser. Sibilant vocal sounds like S, T, and CH, ch, contain little low-end information. This means a vocal compressor will tend to boost them more, which enhances sibilants in a bad way. I like to put a de-esser first in all my vocal chains to control sibilants before any other processing or compression. The next category of plugins I like are modulation plugins. They're the fun stuff. These include everything with a varying effect like chorus, flange, and phaser. Most of these effects are put on a single track or bus. Occasionally they'll be used for sections of an entire mix. These can also be good at turning a mono track into a stereo sound, since oftentimes the modulation will affect the stereo field. The modulation of these effects can even be triggered by something from another track, or even using automation. Delays are very useful for adding dimension or an ostinato phrase to a track or bus or mix. A short slapback echo is common for vocal tracks. Longer delays can be set to sync with the song tempo for perfect quarter note or eighth note delays, which are great for a delay throw. Use automation to send just the last word or syllable of a line to a quarter note delay for a great effect to fill up space between lines or sections of a song. Reverbs can model the ambience of a real space. From a small room to a medium-sized orchestral chamber to a full-size stadium, reverbs can deliver. Since they create so many repeats of the original sound, they can sometimes be a little too dense. Delays can be a better choice when a reverb is smearing your vocals too much. Saturation and distortion plugins can help a track cut through a mix, since the saturation adds upper harmonics to the tone. It can also serve as a nice special effect for parts of a song, or it can sound similar to a telephone or a bullhorn. Saturation and distortion can be useful on many sources aside from just dirty electric guitars. They can be useful on vocals, bass guitar, or even snare drum. They'll help them all cut through a mix. The final type of plugin you need is a good limiter or loudness maximizer. Although the so-called loudness wars have been declared over, commercial music is still stuck at a much louder level than we can get with a typical dynamic mix. Putting a loudness maximizer at the very end of your signal chain can get your mix to the level of popular music released today. Most maximizers also have good loudness meters that can be used to help you adjust the final level. There are other uses for limiters, and clipper plugins can also help them when in the output chain, but that'll be for another video. Interface. The next item for us to consider is the interface. That's the device that converts analog to digital for getting sound into your computer, and digital to analog so you can hear what you've recorded and mixed. Most consumer interfaces come with at least one microphone preamp. If you're going to record a microphone, you have to have a preamp to raise the weak signal of the microphone into a line level signal that's strong enough for an interface to record. Line level is the strength of a signal that comes out of a synthesizer or line out jacks on home audio gear. It's a much hotter signal than what comes directly from a passive mic like a dynamic or ribbon. A passive mic like a dynamic doesn't have active amplifying circuits. An active mic like a condenser has a built-in amplifier. That's why they require either batteries or phantom power for their built-in amplifier. 48-volt phantom power is supplied by your interface to its mic inputs. Just avoid using phantom power with passive ribbon mics, since the ribbon can be stretched and damaged from the power. If you have a ribbon and a condenser, you can purchase an inline phantom power blocker that blocks power before the ribbon mic to keep it totally safe. Then you can turn on phantom power to all mic inputs. One important decision with your interface is how many mic preamps do you need? You need one mic input for every analog mic you want to record simultaneously to separate tracks. The only time I'll record two mics to a single track is when tracking a guitar speaker with dual mics. That's when I prefer to blend two dynamic or ribbon mics with a mic blending box or a small mixing board. That way I can balance the two mics in the analog world first, then commit that tone to a single channel in my DAW. Yes, I won't have as many options during mixing, but sometimes limits are a good thing. We can easily get overwhelmed when we have too many options, and that makes mixing take a lot longer. Consider how many pairs of headphones you want to connect to your interface. Some interfaces only have one headphone out. Yes, you can use a Y adapter, but not if the two headphones are different brands or models. The headphone output levels aren't the same in all interfaces. Be sure to read product reviews to see if people have trouble with the headphone levels being too low before you decide on an interface. If you're going to connect outboard analog synthesizers or gear like compressors or multi-effects units, you'll need enough line inputs and outputs for all that. Many of those devices can be stereo, so that means you lose two inputs and sometimes two outputs as well per device. You can save on inputs and outputs if you don't have to run everything all at once. If you don't record vocals and keyboards at the same time, you can frequently use the same channel for both by repatching. Unplug one item and plug another one in its place. Patching wires from the back of gear that's stacked up can be a pain,
which is why I have all my gear going through patch bays.
That way I can route any piece of hardware to or from any input or output I've got. Plus, I can daisy chain outboard gear for complete custom hardware channel strip. It lets me easily repatch so I don't need separate inputs and outputs for all the hardware I might choose to use at some point or other. Cables. With inputs and outputs comes the need for cables. The more inputs and outputs you've got, the more cables you need. If you have a patch bay, you need to have a lot of spare patch cables. A common format for both line and mic cables uses XLR connectors for balanced signals. Home patch bays usually use 1/4-inch TRS 3-conductor cables, which are also balanced. Synthesizers can also use cables with TRS connectors, although some older units might only have 1/4-inch TS 2-conductor cables, which are unbalanced. Electric guitars, basses, and pedals also use cables with TS connectors. Some speaker cables going between passive speakers and a power amp speaker's outputs also use TS connectors, but be sure you never use an instrument cable to connect a speaker to a power amp. Instrument cables use much thinner wire and will overheat and cause a fire. If you have many cables going to a certain place in your room, studio, or house, you might consider using an audio snake. That's a multi-channel cable that can come in lengths long enough to run across the room or across the house. For example, if you have a bedroom studio, you could use a snake from that room to your garage in order to mic up a drum kit in there. Use shorter mic cables from the drum mics to the snake's junction box, but then it's just one big snake cable from the garage to your studio. Snakes typically patch line levels as well as mic level signals.
That means you can feed a headphone output to the snake.
In our garage example, not only are you sending the mics to the studio, but the studio can also send a control room or headphone mix back to the drummer. Microphones. We've mentioned a bit about mics already, so let's review the various pickup patterns.
The simplest to understand is an omnidirectional mic.
That's a mic that picks up sound from all directions with the same sensitivity. Frequently, you see omnidirectional mics used on location
for news interviews on TV.
Omni mics tend to maintain their frequency response curve even when you get very close to a source. The next pickup pattern is a family of patterns known as cardioid. That means they're more sensitive to sound in front of the mic and less sensitive to sound from behind and to the sides.
This pickup pattern is great to home in on a source without picking up a lot of extraneous sound from other directions.
Cardioid patterns come in a few different shapes depending on how well they reject side and rear noise. Super and hypercardioid patterns are all in the cardioid family, but vary in how narrow their pickup pattern can be. You'd think this would be great, but as you get away from the mic's hotspot, the tone starts to shift. Cardioid mics also have an issue when you get too close to a sound source. The low frequencies tend to increase as you get very close, and that's called proximity effect. It can be a benefit or an issue. If you're doing voiceover work and want to sound like you have a very deep radio announcer voice, then get close up to your mic so the proximity effect will be increased, making your voice sound deeper. If you have an electric guitar that's sounding too boomy, then the mic might be introducing too much proximity effect. The solution there is to simply move further away from the speaker, which lowers the proximity effect. The final pickup pattern I'd like to talk about is the figure 8. Nearly every ribbon mic has a figure 8 pattern, and most multi-pattern mics can switch to a figure 8 pattern. That's a pattern that picks up strongest in front and in back of the mic, and rejects sound from the sides, top, and bottom. Ribbon mics can be damaged by wind, since too much blowing air can stretch out and damage the ribbon. Figure 8 patterns are useful with several mic techniques like mid-side and blumline, which we'll cover in future videos. There are several types of microphones that all use different methods of converting sound into electricity. The most common categories are dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. You're most likely to have a dynamic and condenser in your collection. A great all-purpose mic is the Shure SM57. It's a common mic for guitar speakers, as well as snares and even toms. They're also great for singing as well as speaking. The SM57 has been the mic of choice for the podium of the President of the United States for decades now. They're very durable, don't need phantom power, and have a presence peak in the upper mid frequencies that helps them cut through a dense mix. Condenser mics tend to sound more hi-fi with fairly flat frequency response curves that make them a good choice for sources that need a lot of detail. That may not be the best choice for screaming rock vocals, but might be just perfect for subtle ballads or mixes where the vocals are center stage and need a lot of detail. They're also great for full-range instruments like piano or acoustic guitar. Just remember that condenser mics require phantom power from your interface or mixer. I recommend using a pop filter whenever you record vocals. If you don't, certain consonants blow a puff of wind into the mic that tends to sound similar to an explosion. These are called plosives and usually happen when you pronounce the letter P or B. Using a pop filter will reduce or eliminate plosives since they disperse the blast of air away from the mic capsule. One explosive P pronounced during a line can ruin a track. After you record a vocal track, be sure to listen back for sibilants and plosives. If you hear any in your track, you might want to re-record those parts so they don't ruin your track. Most pop filters clamp directly to your mic stand, so let's talk about them next. For recording vocals, I highly recommend using a mic stand with a boom. Avoid holding the mic by hand, as the handling noise can be picked up by the mic and interfere with an otherwise great track. A mic with a good shock mount can help reduce vibrations from traveling from the floor through the stand and into your mic. There are attachments you can get for a mic stand so it can hold more than just your mic and pop filter. You can get accessories like a headphone holder, and even a music stand attachment, or a tablet and phone holder to hold your lyrics while recording. It's nice to have all those items sharing the same stand since this reduces floor clutter. With too many stands, it's easier to bump, step on, or accidentally kick or knock one of them, which can be picked up by the mic and ruin a take. Headphones and monitors. You have to have a good set of closed-back headphones for recording vocals. Avoid open-back and semi-open headphones, since the sound from those headphones will bleed into your mic and ruin your recording. You want headphones that keep the sound in the cans and not blast out into the room. If you're going to run your DAW while recording other people, I recommend using the same model of headphones for you and the singer. That way you'll hear exactly what they're hearing and at the same volume. Apples to apples. If the headphones are too loud, the singer will tend to sing louder to compensate. That doesn't mean you're getting the best performance. The opposite is also an issue. With headphones that are too quiet, the singer will overcompensate and sing too quietly, again affecting the performance. Some singers do better when they can hear their own voice louder and will move one headphone cup behind that ear and use their hand to direct the sound from their mouth to that ear. They still hear the background music in the other headphone, but hear themselves really well in one ear. Some singers prefer to hear reverb on their voice when they record, so it sounds more like a record while still in the creation phase. With a DAW, you can add reverb while they're tracking to help them get a great performance, but you don't have to use it during mixdown. While you can mix on headphones, the experience is very different from using monitor speakers. I only mix with headphones as a double check for what I've mixed using speaker monitors. I do use SonarWorks Sound ID software when mixing on either monitors or headphones, but I still mix on monitors first. The final piece of studio gear you need is furniture. You need a solid desk or table for your monitor, keyboard, and mouse. Don't use anything rickety because you're going to be resting your wrists on it while you work, and you don't need it falling down. If you're handy with woodworking, you can design and build your own. Be sure the desk is at a good height for you. You'll be sitting in front of that computer for hours, so make sure you have a good chair. Adjustable height is a helpful feature, and so are adjustable or removable armrests. With armrests out of the way, you can play guitar or keyboard parts without having to move elsewhere, so you can run your DAW and perform at the same time. Along with furniture, it's helpful to have stands for your gear so it can be set up and ready to play at a moment's notice. If you play guitar, have a couple of guitar stands around so you don't have to remove it from its case each time you want to lay down a track. The same goes for keyboards. Either get or build a rack for your keyboard so it's ready to record and not stashed away in a closet. Even a small bookcase can be useful against a wall for a keyboard stand. Make sure you have enough mic stands and cables for what you do. If you track vocals, have a mic with a cable on a stand with a pop filter ready to go. Even if you set it to one side when not in use, it's still going to make your workflow a lot more conducive to creating instead of getting things out, setting things up, and putting them away all the time. The least fun item I recommend for all desktop computers is an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS. The last thing you want is to capture the perfect take only to have the power go out before you have a chance to save your work. Not only can you lose your work, but it's also possible your storage device can get corrupted, wiping out all your data, programs, and operating system. Be sure to get a UPS that supplies enough power to run your interface as well as your computer system. This is also a good time to mention the need to have backups. As a computer consultant for decades, I have a saying: always do a backup when you've done more than you care to redo. Save files out to an external USB memory stick and do it often. Save files to a cloud storage service like OneDrive or Dropbox. You can never have too many backups. I save in several places, and when a hurricane approaches, I move one of my backup drives to an off-site location further inland, just in case. Optional gear. The longer you have a studio, the more gear you'll probably acquire or make. Sometimes it'll be bigger items like making a portable gobo for reducing the loudness of instruments or background noise. Other times it'll be small ticket items like Velcro ties to neatly bundle your cables, or a simple extension cable for your headphones. You don't always have to spend a lot to make life easier. Eventually, you should consider getting floor-mounted speaker stands for your main monitors. If you set your speakers on your desk, the speakers are acoustically coupled to the desk, so the whole desk can vibrate at certain frequencies and even act like a wonky speaker cabinet. If you set your speakers on separate stands, they'll be decoupled from your desk. You can also add monitor isolation tools to decouple the monitors from the stands. This is exactly what I do with my own monitors. We won't go into the science behind it in this video, but monitor decoupling helps tighten up the low end and gives you immeasurably more accurate playback. It doesn't hurt to have some moving blankets around. You can surround a guitar cabinet with them to cut the volume down a bit in the room. You can drape them around a kick drum to make a sound tunnel with a mic at the opening at the far end. You can drape them over a chair and use them like a portable gobo. You could set that in front of noise sources like fans from your computer. You can hang them on a wall or in a closet to create a vocal booth or area. If you don't have one attached to your mic stand, then you can get a music stand. The one I use works with anything from a sheet of paper to a binder to a phone or tablet device. You can also get a clip-on light for a music stand that brings us to our final topic. The last piece of gear you might consider is some lighting. There are small fixtures made for stage lighting, but today you can get LED smart bulbs as replacements for your existing room lights. They can be controlled by an app on your phone to change color, run through patterns, and of course, they can dim too. Some are even sound activated, which further enhances the mood. Another studio favorite is the classic lava lamp from the 1960s. I don't know why, but I see them in pictures of just about every top studio. Lighting certainly doesn't help the sound, but it can help the creative mood while recording.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Try to learn something new every day and have a great time doing it.